However, even if it'd look bad, it'd still be better if you win. He wasn't like the Rainmaster, who had been living a reclusive life for centuries. He wasn't like the Earthmaster, who had a secret mission on hand. And he definitely wasn't like the Watermaster, who could do whatever he wanted. If he wasn't anyone, but still insisted on standing out, refusing to attend just because he didn't feel like it, then after a while, it'd create resentment, and there'd be talk. Even if he wouldn't think anything of it, it'd make things difficult for Jinwu. Thus, he accepted Shi Qingshuan's invite on the spot. "All right," he said, "I will definitely be there when the time comes." In the following days, Xilin tried all sorts of ways, but still couldn't succeed in separating Qirong from the man's body, and Qirong was growing quite pleased with himself. Thank goodness for Guzi, who didn't mind feeding his dad, as Xilin really didn't feel like stuffing anything into his mouth. On the day of the Mid-Autumn Festival, Xilin drew an array outside Puchi's shrine, locked the door from the outside, left Roya behind to keep Qirong bound, and reported to the heavenly court. In verse, they say, "White jaded capital of the heavens, 12 towers, 5 cities. The immortal strokes my head, here bound to receive immortality." The white jaded capital here was, of course, talking about the heavenly court. During the Mid-Autumn Festival, everything was renewed and refreshed at the heavenly court. And other than that, Xilin could see the streets, corridors, and terraces were filled with increased security guards, probably appointed after Hua Chang's intrusion last time. The banquet was set under the moon, in open air, surrounded by elegant fragrances, an air of proprietorness, clouds of prosperity, and blossoms flurried in the air like snow, giving way to both the space for entertainment and moon-watching. For moon-watching from the mortal realm, if one were to create a circle by touching one's thumb and index finger, the moon would fit right in that frame. However, for moon-watching in the heavens, that moon would be bright and immaculate, like a giant jaded screen that stood but a close distance away, as if with only a few steps it could be caught. Truly, an ethereal sight that could not be seen in the mortal realm. Seated at the head of the banquet, needless to say, was of course Jinwu. However, there was a hidden, intricate machination as to how the rest should be seated, a method to order and position. Seated too up front was naturally a no-no, but seated too far away, the heavenly officials themselves wouldn't want to be. Xilin didn't really care for this etiquette. However, one must be formally dressed for the Mid-Autumn banquet, meaning one better wear what one's divine statue looked like in the mortal realm. Xilin didn't have a single divine statue, so he still wore that white cultivation robe with a bamboo hat tied on his back. Although it was a little shabby, he really didn't have anything better. Dressing this way was kind of conspicuous, so he felt it'd be better if he sat somewhere more hidden away. Just as he had already found a random corner to sit in, he looked up and saw Feng Xin walk his way. Both of them stopped for a moment, nodded slightly to each other, and considered it a greeting. Feng Xin walked on for a few steps, but then turned around and asked, "What are you doing sitting there?" Xilin thought that he had sat down in the wrong spot and stood up. "I thought I could sit anywhere," he said. Feng Xin was about to speak when Xilin saw, far in the distance, Shi Qingshuan waving at him from the front. Shi Qingshuan was in her female form at the moment, and when Feng Xin turned and saw, it was like he saw something foreboding. Looking aghast, he left Xilin to his own devices and hurried away. Shi Qingshuan shouted, "Your Highness, over here!" The Windmaster was someone prominently popular in the heavenly court, and her seat was naturally one of the best, close to Jinwu. This wave and call made many of the heavenly officials look over, and Jinwu, who was at first sitting silently with his hand supporting his cheek, also noticed Shelian and inclined his head toward him. So Shelian had no choice but to go over. On the way, there was expectedly no sight of Lang Chen-cho. It seemed he had long since declined his invitation to the mid-autumn banquet in favor of searching for Chi-rong's whereabouts. Shi-Ching-Xuan found Shelian a seat right next to her, a spot with the best feng shui. Shelian didn't think it appropriate, but since the Wind Master was so fervently gracious, she was already pushing him down to sit. She said, "I'll take you to the kid later, after the banquet is over. He's a little ugly, but he's pretty obedient." At this point, Shelian could only say thanks. Turning his head, he saw that the one seated near the two of them was Ming Yi, sullenly playing with a jade cup. The hand playing with the small vessel was actually whiter than the jade cup. The color of his face was normal enough, though. So it seemed that the injuries he received whilst at the Ghost City were healed. Shelian greeted, "Lord Earthmaster, you seem well." Ming Yi nodded once, looking like he didn't want to talk. Shi-Ching-Xuan, however, was the complete opposite. She knew everyone and could say a few words to anyone sitting front, back, left, right, and even those much further away. Shelian was quite in awe of how she could remember all the names of those heavenly officials, no matter their rank. Seated next to him was a young man of 18 or 19, his nose tall, his brows deep, and his raven hair slightly curly. Shelian didn't know him, and he didn't know Shelian either. The two looked at each other for a bit, feeling a little lost, and ended the awkward stare after Shelian made up a random greeting. Looking around some more, Feng Xin and Mu Cheng both sat as far from each other as they could, and the one seated right in front of him, chatting with each other with familiarity, were three heavenly officials. On the left was a black-clad civil official, his brows respectable, his appearance generous. Between words, 5 fingers gently tapped a regular rhythm on the table, his expression steady and calm, looking somehow familiar. The middle was, of course, the very acquainted Pei Ming. On the right was a white-robed gentleman, a fan gently fanning in his hand. On the front of that fan was the word shui for water, and 3 wavy lines were drawn on the back. His brows and eyes looked quite similar to Shi-Ching-Xuan's, seemingly kind, but his expression very clearly indicated that he didn't care for anyone. Who else could it be but the water tyrant? Shelian understood. These were the 3 tumors. That black-clad official must be Ling Wen's most powerful form, and it sure was impressively proper. The 3 of them greeted each other and used all manner of ways from all ends of the earth and heavens to praise and compliment each other, to the point where Shi-Ching-Xuan grumbled under her breath. Fake, so fake. Shelian found it rather amusing, however. Just then, he noticed at the front of the banquet tables was a small, beautiful pavilion with red stage curtains covering all 4 of its sides. He asked, "What's that?" Shi-Ching-Xuan smiled. "Oh, you don't know? This is also a really popular game in the upper court. Just watch, it's starting now." She trailed off as a few rumbling sounds of thunder came rolling beyond the skies. Jinwu glanced at the sky, poured a glass of wine, and passed it down. Then, in the midst of rumbling thunder, the seated heavenly officials started laughing and hollering as they passed around the glass of wine, hollering, "Don't give it to me! Don't give it to me! Pass it to him!" Just watching the others play, Shelian somewhat figured out the rules and thought, so it's drummed flower passing. The crowd passed around the glass of wine to each other without spilling it. The wine could be passed to anyone, but it must not be passed back to the same person. When the thunder stopped, whoever the wine cup ended up with would be picked upon for fun. Only he didn't know what kind of fun it would be. To Shillian, the game wasn't a friendly one. The one you pass the cup of wine to would be the one who got ridiculed, so most would pass it to ones they're closer with. Yet he wasn't close with most of the heavenly officials present, so how could he dare to so nonchalantly ridicule the others? He could only pass it to the Windmaster. But what if the Windmaster happened to be the one who passed him the wine? Best if no one passes it to me, Shillian thought, but I might be thinking too highly of myself. Before he even had the thought, the first round was over. Under the intense watch of everyone, that glass of wine stopped in Pei Ming's hand. It seemed Pei Ming was used to this, and downed that glass in one gulp amidst the roaring cheers. The officials clapped and hollered, "Raise it! Raise it!" In the thick of the cheers, the curtains on the four sides of that glamorous pavilion slowly raised. Upon the platform stood a tall general, head raised, steps wide, imposingly impressive. It didn't look like he noticed any of the heavenly officials from below, nor the strangely beautiful scenery of the heavens. He walked a few steps and started singing verses, sonorous and enthusiastic. So, whoever the wine cup ended up with, the pavilion would bring forth the plays written about that particular heavenly official from the mortal realm and perform it for all to see. Due to humans' deep love for making things up, who knew just what kind of shocking play they would see, and one wouldn't know when they'd be picked, so this game was very much thrilling and embarrassing. However, this was how entertainment was derived. It must be said that each of General Pei's plays were all exhilarating, simply because the female counterpart was different every time. Sometimes it was a celestial being, sometimes a ghost, sometimes an unmarried lady. Each female counterpart was more beautiful than the next, and the stories were each more shameless than the next. The heavenly officials watched with deep interest, waiting for the woman to enter the scene. Sure enough, it didn't take long before a black-clad lady entered the stage, her voice like a golden aureole. The two actors sang to each other, the lyrics brazenly flirtatious. The more the crowd watched, the more something didn't feel right, and they started asking around, "What's the name of this play? Who's the woman the general is seducing this time?" Just then, General Pei on the stage called out, "Noble Jie." Below the stage, both Pei Ming and Ling Wen spat out their mouthfuls of wine. Who else could the noble Jie be? Ling Wen's full name was Namgong Jie. The heavenly officials were shocked. Did the two actually have a past together? Ling Wen used a napkin and wiped the corners of his lips, then said flatly, "There's no need to think on it. It's made up." Although the two in question were both a little woeful, still, they were both thick-skinned enough. The play continued on stage, and the two below pretended not to see. Sure Wudu wouldn't let them off the hook so easily, however. He smiled, fanning his fan. "What an exciting play. Any thoughts, you two?" he said. "Not really," Ling Wen replied. "This play is old. My divine statues back then weren't like the ones now. It's only a folk tale. Think about it. In folk tales, as long as it's a woman, who hasn't old Pei tried to seduce?" Everyone agreed wholeheartedly. Pei Ming spoke up. "Hey, you can't say that. It's true that I've seduced pretty much everyone in folk tales, but this one I really haven't. Don't wrong the innocent." "By your logic, since the mortals all say that I've seduced even more male officials whilst I've done nothing, wouldn't I be sitting on pins and needles?" Ling Wen quipped. Ever since Ling Wen was brought to the heavens via appointment, the folktales all told that she did it through seducing another heavenly official, which was also why, at the beginning, The palace of Ling Wen was cold and quiet, with very few worshippers. Apparently, during a period of intense objection, she was cursed to the ends of the earth, and there were even those who'd throw menstrual linens and bralettes into her donation boxes. However, if male officials had similar rumors, they'd gain the title of charming instead, and could take full pleasure in it. Clearly, although the situations were similar, a difference between male and female existed, and the consequences were different. Just as Shirin was thinking this, the next round had begun. Shawudu was laughing earlier, but this round came to him. The two tumors next to him raised and curted their hands in congratulations in unison. Instant karma, take it graciously, they said. Shawudu furrowed his brows for an instant, then drank the wine, and those curtains were raised once more. Before the curtains had even reached the very top, two long trolls came from within. My wife, hubby. Boundlessly affectionate, the tender voices twisted and turned, filled with lingering yearning. Thus, from below, Shilin saw with his own eyes goosebumps popping up on over half of Shi Wudu's and Shi Qingshuan's bodies. Shi Qingshuan jumped to her feet. Go, hurry and cut it off, she yelled. Shi Wudu immediately shouted, drop it right now. Without even seeing, one could easily guess that the play picked must be from the folklore of husband and wife between the Lord Watermaster and the Lady Windmaster. Tales of love and hatred would always be fan favorites when people told stories. If either was already there, then good. If not, even better, because then anything could be made up. Technically, whatever the gods had actually done themselves were the conventional legends. But sometimes, when they saw what the mortals came up with for them, they couldn't help but be amazed by what was truly legendary. The moment Shawudu spoke up, the curtains really did drop down. The heavenly officials in the audience all wanted to laugh, but didn't dare to, suffering from holding in their mirth. Shelin, however, smiled and asked, Lord Windmaster, I didn't know that you can call for the curtains to drop. Shi Qingshuan was still shaking and replied, Yeah, it's no big deal. Just donate 100,000 merits. Shelin sat speechless, and the third round began. This time, the thunder didn't rumble for very long, and that wine cup was passed to the young man sitting next to Shelin. Seeing this, the reaction from the crowd of heavenly officials was odd. It wasn't fervent, but it wasn't cold. More like they were very interested in seeing the play, but didn't want to be so obvious about it. That young man didn't seem to be too interested in the game, but he still drank the cup of wine. He put down the cup, and the curtains were raised once more. There were two people upon the stage. One was a young general with curly hair, like that of a stone lion's mane, and although exceedingly exaggerated, he still looked heroically sprightly, so he must be portraying that young heavenly official. The other one had pointy lips and monkey cheeks, the very portrayal of a wretched clown, jumping all over the stage. When that young man faced him, he'd act serious, but greasy and loathsome. When that young man turned around, he'd make faces and take a sword to backstab. No doubt, the role of a two-faced, cunning villain. That clown performed with vigor and over-embellishment, like it was a silly, comedic play. But the reactions from the heavenly officials in the audience were vastly different. Shelin noticed that the officials in the lower ranks all laughed uproariously, while the higher-ranking officials, like Shi Qingshuan and Shi Wudu, all frowned wordlessly, not thinking it amusing whatsoever. At the same time, he also noticed veins suddenly on the fists of that young man beside him, and Shelin became alarmed. Although he couldn't understand what was going on stage, he could still guess that it was ridiculing another. Besides, even if he didn't know who was who, just the way the play was enacted made one feel extremely uncomfortable. That young man seemed ready to throw a fit, so Shilin took a chopstick from the table and hurled it toward the rope controlling the curtains. The not-so-sharp chopstick brushed by the rope and actually snapped it. The curtains dropped noisily, and the officials all cried in shock. How can this be? What's going on? They all looked to Shilin, some even rising to their feet. Shilin was about to open his mouth when the next second something exploded next to his ear. It seemed that the young man had shattered that white jaded cup in his fist. It appeared that the play had provoked his outrage, and he threw away the shards of that jaded cup in a fit. He jumped to his feet, sprang onto the table, pushed off with his feet, and leapt onto that pavilion, barging through the curtains. A number of heavenly officials rushed to lift the curtains, but there was already no one inside. The crowd was in an uproar. Oh no, they shouted. His Highness Qi Ying went down to beat people up again. Shilin wondered, Qi Ying, the palace of Qi Ying? So this was the martial god of the West, Chuan Yijin? He hurriedly asked Shiqing Xuan, Lord Windmaster, what's going on? What's with His Highness Qi Ying going down to beat up people again? Shiqing Xuan snapped out of it and replied, beating up people is just beating up people. She cleared her throat. You might not believe it, but Qi Ying frequently beats up his own worshippers. That really was the first time he'd ever heard of a heavenly official who dared assault their own followers, since that was something that could destroy their image in a believer's mind. He wanted to inquire some more, but heard a lower heavenly official further away speak up in displeasure. Lord Chuan really is too immature. Everyone was just having fun. Doesn't he know how to cooperate a little? Who hasn't been picked on? Did General Pei and Lingwen Jinjin not get laughed at? Besides, it wasn't even him who was being made fun of, so why is he so angry? Yeah, he really thinks too much of himself. Even if he's mad, there's no need to throw a fit right this second. The banquet is a fun occasion. No one's here to watch his temper. Really? A third one said, All right. A kid is a kid. He's not even here anymore, and it'll be more fun without him anyway. Shilin mused while listening to them talk. The feast was only temporarily disrupted, and Lingwen seemed to have already sent someone to take care of Chuan Yijin's affair. After some officials came out and assuaged the others, the banquet and the games continued. Thus, the thunder rumbled, and the fourth round of drummed flower passing began. At first, Shilin was only watching other people play. He couldn't blend in and was happy that others didn't bother him. He was just about to chat to Shiqing Xuan when, unexpectedly, just then, a hand was suddenly extended to him and passed him that white, jaded wine cup.